Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. However, this video catches you, thank you so much for joining Chris once again. We always appreciate you guys taking the time to watch these videos. By the way, if there's ever a topic that you're curious about that you want to know more about, please call, email, text us, let us know. But without further ado, for the past couple of weeks, I've been flapping my gums probably more than what people want to hear. You've learned about multi-unit properties. You've learned about how the pre-approval process works. And so instead of boring you with continuous loan stuff, we thought this week Chris could share some of the most important information that he shares with people that are looking to purchase their first home or maybe purchase their second home. So I'll let Chris go ahead and take it away, but I'm really looking forward to this. I've bought a couple of homes myself. I made the mistake of not using Chris the first time I bought a house. The second time I did use Chris, and can say, I know probably at this point several hundred real estate agents, and there are very few that I would feel comfortable referring to a family member or a friend. And Chris is the guy. So please pay attention to this because it's so hard to find somebody that that you can trust, and Chris is that real estate agent for you. So, Chris, without further ado, take it away, sir.
Really appreciate that. It sincerely do, and it means a lot coming from you. Investor, savvy guy all around, educated, etc. So I really appreciate that. And yeah, I just I'm excited to share something that came up for me while Cole was making the intro, is that if you haven't watched the other videos, they're not short, so but they are worth the time. I would say if you have any interest in multi-unit, go back and watch that video. If you have any interest on the pre-approval process, go back and watch that. There's a lot in there. If you would rather not listen to the whole thing, totally fine. Pick up the phone. Cole and I are happy to jump on a call and talk about your specific needs. So with that said, Cole, I know that you were hoping to maybe ask a question or two. So how about you start off and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, I'm just curious. Somebody that's coming to you that's like, "Hey, Chris, like I want to buy a house, but I have no idea, where to even start." Of course, you're going to send them over to a lender to get pre-approved. But let's say, from the time that you refer them over to a lender to get pre-approved, is there anything that happens between the time that they are working on getting everything in, and that pre-approval actually goes out, or is it, are you waiting to hear back from the lender? What happens between that process, and then once they do get pre-approved, maybe you could share a little bit about what happens from there as well.
Yeah, that's a great question. So absolutely. Um, there's definitely going to be some concurrent timelines, some simultaneous process. I've developed a process that will allow us to, what I tell all my clients is I want to shorten the learning curve. I want to shorten the learning curve between where we're at today and where I'm giving you keys to your new home. And there's a lot in there. There's a lot involved. There's always a lot of questions when it comes to the process of escrow, the process of what's happening in the market. And ultimately, I say it's my belief that sitting down and talking about the market, talking about the home search, talking about the new National Association of Realtors changes with commissions and all of this needs to be addressed and it needs to be talked about up front so that we're not flying by the seat of our pants, learning on the fly. If that's how you want to roll and you have zero interest in sitting down, I'm not going to say no. I'm not going to not work with you. However, I'm also going to forewarn you that we're making it harder than necessary. We've got to, if I'm actually celebrating 20 years this upcoming July. In 20 years of selling real estate, I've developed a system that will take a lot of the stress out of the whole equation and answer a lot of questions up front so that we can get you to that ending, that finish line in a less stressful manner. Okay. So with that said, absolutely. Even without the pre-approval, and there's only so much that I can speak to when it comes to the process. Okay, so we can talk about the market. We can talk about the market in generalities. So we can talk about certain things. What my preference would be is that if you reach out to Cole and get pre-approved, and so I used Cole for my own personal mortgage. So similar to what Cole had just shared, I know dozens. I know dozens and dozens of loan officers. And Cole was the one that I picked for my mortgage because he knows his stuff. He's a savvy investor. He knows his stuff top to bottom. Here's a confession. I I think Cole had to chase me down for my paperwork.
For sure. It's not
I
fun.
It's not fun. It's not fun. I should know better, right? And it was just one of these things where my wife and I were talking, and then it's just like, gosh, we know we're going to get pre-approved, but it's just one of those things to where, I'll get to it, I'll get to it, and then I get that call coming through, and it's Cole saying, "How are those taxes looking?
Yeah.
How's the pay stubs or whatever, right?" And then so not fun at all. And yet at the same time, actually, if you're halfway organized, you can get this stuff knocked out really, really fast. And then so if in fact you're willing to take that effort and submit your documentation to Cole, then we're able to speak in specifics when it comes to that consultation. Then we can talk about specific data about what's happening in the market for the type of home that you're looking for. Because here's the thing, our market's very segmented. If you're looking for a $2 million home, that's going to be very different than a $700,000 townhouse. So there's going to be different dynamics at play, and I'll be able to speak very specific to your search. So my recommendation would be that you put in the work and you actually get pre-approved prior to our sit down. We can cover a lot of ground without the pre-approval, but it's so much more valuable, in my opinion, if you can actually get pre-approved. So that was a long-winded, yes, we would sit down and talk about the process, but there's a lot in there that a lot of people aren't aware of.
What are some of the misconceptions that you see kind of come up, um, time and time again? Once that client comes over, they're pre-approved, they're excited to go out shopping. Like for me, I can think of a few things on my end that kind of consistently come up when I'm getting somebody pre-approved. They're usually asking about the interest rate and have some certain like preconceived notions about how interest rates work. They probably got some preconceived notions about like the market that maybe a family member has told them, or maybe they've seen online or on the news or whatever it may be. Are there anything? Are there any pieces of information that you're like, man, I wish I could get this to people sooner? So that obviously we can't do anything for them until they come to us. But is there anything you as a buyer's agent that you're either like, man, I wish there was some way that I could get this information instilled to people early on before they came and said they were looking to buy a house? Or is there anything that you consistently see people that are pre-approved that are about to go shopping for a house that they often have a misconception about?
Yeah, there's a lot in there.
Yep.
So there's a lot in there, and I think the first one that's popping up has to do with the fierce competition that we're seeing out there still. Um, just made an offer on a $650,000 home, 1,100 square feet in Upland, right next to Upland High School. And there were 12 offers,
Yeah.
12 offers. And I want to say um, it went from 650 to 720, I believe.
Oh,
I'm not always privy to the final contract price, but that broker did share with me. Another one just submitted an offer, and the list price was, I want to say it was 650 again. This one was in Ontario, and there were six offers, and it went above asking per the other broker. He wasn't willing to tell me what they closed at, or what they agreed to, but it was over 650. So the competition is absolutely fierce. We're sitting here making this video at the footsteps of the busiest time of our entire market. If not, we've already kind of started. And so you've got to take your buyer's hat off and put on your seller's hat.
that's great
Pretend
advice.
pretend that you're the seller. Okay. This isn't just Chris, the buyer's agent, and Cole, the loan officer, telling you that we want to know the bits and pieces of your finances for our sake. We're needing you to be positioned to compete in a high level. Well, how do we do that? We need to have our ducks in a row. If you've watched the previous video, you have to be prepared. Because if you're the seller, now go back to my putting the seller hat on. If you're the seller and you have one, two, three, four, five offers, or maybe you even have just two offers, one offer doesn't have their pre-approval, they don't have their proof of funds in a PDF, they don't know what's what with regard to their finances, and the other one is squared away, all dialed up, and everything's equal, who do you think they're going to pick? If you were the
Yep.
seller, who would you pick? Right?
Yeah. Yeah. They seem to have their ducks in a row. They're organized. They're persistent. Like, oh man, these are people that are serious about buying my house. Um, and these are the type of people that I want to work with versus somebody that's hard to get a hold of. It's like, oh, maybe I'm option number two, three, four, or five, and they're not really serious about buying my house. I know when my mom sold her house, I called it 2.5 offers because it was like three offers came in. We were able to get in contact with two of the people that put in offer. The third one, like, just wouldn't answer. So it's like, cool. Like, we're not even going to bother engaging. It's like, if they're already that way when the offer goes through, how are they going to be 2 weeks into escrow when negotiations are going on or whatever? So, dude, that's great advice. Like, big takeaway right there for me is put on your seller's hat. And it's not so much to be like, oh, you've got to, stop thinking about your own interest and only think about the sellers. But it's like, hey, put on the seller's hat and get an idea of like, if you were selling your house, what would be the things that you would want to see? Because you're both human beings. And what you would want to see most likely is going to be something that the seller would want to see as well. I really like that. That's really good advice. So obviously, like, um, the price is always so important when you're a buyer. But are there any, without, I know you've got all kinds of secret sauce. I've witnessed it very, very many times, whether it was with buyers that I had pre approved that you were putting in offers for and doing negotiations on, or when it was, me myself that you were getting an offer and on a property. What are some other things that maybe buyers aren't privy to that do go into making like a strong offer? Again, you don't have to, share all the secret sauce here, but is there anything that you're like, hey, here's a way that we, can make our offer look stronger, increase our chances of getting our offer accepted, besides, of course, just the highest price?
Yeah, yeah, that's a good question. And so,
And actually, a kind of a follow up that's in the same line of that. Apologize for interrupting, but right in the same line. Like the question to that is behind that is, oh, I hear that there's all of these cash buyers. Like, is it even worth me going out there and trying to buy a house with these cash offers? The big institutional hedge funds are out there, putting in offers on houses. Should I even bother, Chris? I hear that all these cash offers are happening, which I think kind of goes in line with the question of, hey, how do we compete?
Right. Yeah, and so at least in Southern California, I personally am not seeing those institutional buyers. I've heard of these big hedge funds coming through and buying whole neighborhoods, but they're not buying neighborhoods in our area.
Yeah,
The economics just don't make sense here in Southern California. So, but there are cash buyers. There are cash buyers that are coming in, whether it's through inheritance, whether it's through a 1031 exchange, and that you're working against an investor. There are many, many strong buyers out there. There's two big things that you have to hang your hat on when crafting an offer: price or terms, right? And sometimes it's not all about the price when it comes to the seller's decision. Sometimes there is a heavy emphasis on terms. Sometimes um, I've had multiple sellers that I've worked with that they're saying, Chris, I don't care if the buyer has a better offer. I want to see a family get this because there's an emotional attachment to the home. Okay, well that's your call to make, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, right? Um, so it's not just about the price. Now, when it comes to crafting an offer, we've got to understand the frame of reference is that it's 2024 now. We've been in uh, essentially a seller's market since 2011.
yeah,
Okay. Which is it's weird to say, but that's just the facts, right? After coming off of the Great Recession, there was a moment of severe weakness in the market. There was a heavy buyer's market. Buyers had a plethora of options to pick from, and prices were reflecting that. They were substantially lower than they were today. However, coming from 2011 to current day, and when you have a seller who has their pick of the litter because there's more buyers than there are sellers. So there's a limited supply of options for buyers. And so you have to do something that's going to help you stand out. Well, to what you just said, Cole, the buyer's agents that are skillful that can reach out and communicate to the seller's agent and say, hey, Mr. Seller's agent, hey, Mrs. Seller's agent, what is it that the seller is looking for besides price? Do they need a specific closing date? Are they really attached to something in the home? Like, is there a certain item that they're taking with them? Do they need a longer? Do they want? Mr. Seller's agent? Do you like to see certain things in the contract? Because sometimes, as a seller's agent myself, as a quick side note, is that 50% of my business I represent sellers. So I understand what it is that a seller's agent's looking for. So when it comes to crafting my offers as a buyer's agent, I'm going to go in with the mindset, again, putting my seller's agent hat on, and I got to make sure that I'm representing my buyer to the best of my ability. So what does that look like? It means crafting an offer that's modified to fit the seller's needs. You'd be shocked, Cole, and we've had this conversation, so maybe not shocked, but how often a buyer's agent will come in, never hear from them. They'll never make that initial call. They'll come in with a contract that looks like they just they don't know what they were doing.
yeah,
And then so and then they get mad when they didn't get the offer accepted because they never returned my call, right? So you have to craft the offer to meet the needs of the seller. And then you also have to have a process in place where we you and I, you already know this, we have a process of how do we follow up with the seller's agent after the offer's been submitted? What's the dialogue behind, us being able to reduce contingency timelines? And there's so many other smaller tweaks that we make, but ultimately it means customizing the offer in order to meet the needs of not only the seller, but the seller's agent to make them feel comfortable. Because Cole kind of said it about his mom's sale. We're getting married to this other party for 30 days, for
Yeah,
45 days. So when you submit that offer, this is a job interview, right? Or this is a proposal, to use
that's
my
right.
wedding analogy. So we need to put our best foot forward and show them that we're not going to be a nightmare to work with when we're in escrow, and that's relationship building, etc., and which Cole and I have worked a lot on.
Yeah, and I mean, that makes me think of a couple of things on my end is, as a lender, sometimes when you, Chris, you're putting in the offer and maybe it's been a month since the pre-approval was done, or maybe it's been 2 months or whatever it may be, and the pre-approval is still good, right? Like there's been no changes to your credit, your income, your assets, but sometimes the listing agent, like you're saying, hey, listing agent, what do you want? Oh, I've got to have a DU, or oh, I've got to have proof of funds, or all of them, want different things for different reasons. And sometimes it seems silly, but the reality is like perception is reality. So like, do you want to? So I think you even say this sometimes. It's like, um, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? Which is like I think good good advice for marriage as well, since we're staying in there. Been talking about that already. But it's like, hey, whether getting a DU, I think getting a DU, which is a system that lenders run loans through, I think it's silly because I could put whatever I want. But there's no point. If the listing agent wants the DU because it makes them feel good, I've got to get it and provide it, even if I could put whatever I want in a DU. I could say, you make $1 million and you've got $1 million in the bank. There's nothing, that requires us to put in accurate info. Um,
But
but
on that note, though, not to cut you off, but if
yeah,
they are wanting something specific
yeah,
and you and I are able to get them what they need,
right.
if that's what it's going to take to get the deal done, then what are we going
Let's
to do?
get it. That's right. Absolutely. And where I was going with that is sometimes I think getting the DU is silly. Well, sometimes I'll reach out to somebody, hey, I know I've got your pay stub from a month ago. Um, Guess what? The listing agent wants like the most recent pay stub. We've got to get the most recent pay stub. And people, sometimes buyers will think that that's silly and lag or getting assets. Well, you already know. You've already seen my bank statements. It's like, hey, you as a buyer are shooting yourself in the foot because Chris and I are putting things together, trying to put our best foot forward and look as dialed as we can. But we can only present the information that's provided to us. So, um, yeah, just kind of putting in a piece of advice here is even if it seems silly, it's still we're asking for a reason. We don't want to ask for things unnecessarily. But sometimes time is of the essence. And so getting that bank statement, even though here we are in May. It's like, even if I have the April bank statement and May just came out, the listing agent wants it. We got to get it, and just play ball. And every agent is a little bit different and they want things for different reasons. And so, yeah, so important to just do what's needed and trust that Chris and I are asking for things that are needed to give you the best shot at getting your offer accepted. It's never just because we like looking at another bank statement.
Um, really quick, just to touch on this because it was a question that I just got the other day, and you and I have talked about this, I think on the phone, but I don't think it was on the other Zoom. It had to do with the pre-approval expiring. What what
Yeah.
what's your saying to your
Yeah. So pre-approval letters are good indefinitely, and they are also immediately invalid.
And can
And
you expand
and
on that?
yeah, I couldn't expand on that. Um, so what I mean by that is they're good indefinitely because I will in the letter say that it's typically push it out for 90 days. But the reality is if your credit, your income, and your assets remain the same, you're still good. Like you're still pre approved. So if somebody was pre approved 6 months ago and they happen to like walk by a house and decide, oh my gosh, I told Cole and Chris that I was taking a break from trying to buy a house, but I just found the house and offers are due this afternoon at 2 o'clock or whatever it may be. I'll confirm, hey, last time we looked, this was what your income was. Is that still the case? Yes. Cool. This is what your credit was at. Is that still the same? Yes. This is how much you said that you had available. Is that still the same? Yes. As long as those things remain the same, your pre approval is good. We're still going to be able to close your loan. Like we're going to need to get updated documents, but you're still good. Your pre approval letter is still good. So that's one side of it. On the other side of things, Chris, let's say I pre approved you right now today, and you have a pre approval letter in hand that says that you're good for 90 days. That's like a living document, and that can absolutely change. So, in the same way that I say, as long as your credit, income, and assets remain the same, your pre approval is good. Well, if your credit, income, or assets change, your pre approval letter is no longer good. Meaning, if you get so excited after you're pre approved that you go down to the car dealership and finance a Bentley, you might not be pre approved, even though you have a pre approval letter with today's date. Or if you get mad at your boss and you cuss them out at work tonight and you get fired, you may have a pre approval letter with today's date, but you no longer have that income. It's no longer valid, even though it says it's good for those 90 days. So think of that pre approval as kind of like a living, breathing document. As your income, credit, and assets change, so can that pre approval amount for good or bad. So yeah, that's what I mean by it's good indefinitely, but also can become no longer valid.
So I love that because that's I feel like that should make a lot of sense to everyone. My follow up to that is I was speaking with a gentleman and he was saying, well, we're not going to be looking to buy for at least 10 months or so. When do you think we should get pre-approved? And the reason he was asking because he said, I don't want to get pre-approved now because I think he's like, correct me if I'm wrong, but my approval letter will expire. And it's like, well, not so fast. And I went into with the explanation that Cole has just shared, and the I think the secondary benefit or even the primary benefit of engaging with Cole up front is that you can develop a plan, even if it means you not pulling the trigger now. And I know we touched on this on the pre-approval on the other video, but if you can get the plan in place to make sure that there's nothing unforeseen on your credit, we'll go ahead and make sure that you're pre-approved. So if in fact the right home comes up, maybe a little bit sooner than you're expecting, then boom, you're ready to go. And number two, it doesn't expire as long as everything stays the same. Like Cole was just saying, you're good to go. So yeah, I think that was a pretty significant misconception, and I just it kind of grinds my gears on. I've heard of other buyers in the past feeling pressured to make a decision on a home because they felt that their approval letter was going to expire. And I've heard of them saying, well, their agent basically communicated to them that yeah, it's going to expire, so maybe you should make a decision.
Brutal. That's
That-
terrible.
that's rough.
Another thing
Um,
to add to the benefits of the pre-approval is right now, particular, I would say 10% of people's expectations on what to expect financially, whether that's down payment amount, whether that's how much money is going to be needed, whether it's understanding closing costs, or whether it's understanding payment or taxes or insurance or mortgage insurance. Like maybe 10% of people understand those things. And time again, the people that want to wait until they find the house that they want, and then they rush the pre-approval, they rush into getting into escrow, and then there's something that's found out because they had to rush because they find a house today and offers are due tomorrow morning by 8 a.m. Like, you're rushed and you don't have time to understand conceptually everything. um, you're out of time. And those people have a tendency to get under contract, and there's something that they are not happy about that they weren't aware of, even though they, understood everything that they need to know, and they can wait to get pre-approved. So another big benefit is just when you're not in a rush, this is a big decision. You don't want to be rushed with these kind of decisions. You want to understand your down payment, your closing costs, my fee, title fees, escrow fees, how homeowners insurance works, how property taxes work, how an impound account works. Like most people ask me half a dozen questions, and there's 2 dozen things that they need to be aware of. So the goal when we do the pre-approval is not just to answer the questions that you have, it's also to explain the things that you need to know. You just don't know you need to know them because you don't do loans or help people buy houses all the time. So yeah, it's a big decision, and there's a lot that goes into it, and it's not something that can just be understood, off of a 5 minute phone call. Something's going to be missed. So, Chris, I know we're getting kind of tight on time here, but and we could obviously edit this in or out as we need to. But you mentioned the NAR settlement and buyers, how those changes might happen. Should we touch on that today, or is that better for another
Yeah,
day?
I mean, I say we just knock out what we can,
All right,
and
cool.
yeah. So if you haven't heard, the National Association of Realtors just settled a class action lawsuit, and ultimately there were sellers that felt that they were misled to believe that there were standard commission rates, and they feel that they were coerced to offer out a buyer broker compensation. When in truth, buyer brokers compensation, it was always a negotiable thing. And I clearly I have an opinion about it, but the bottom line is that as of July of 2024, our landscape in Southern California is going to change. A buyer broker agreement is going to be a requirement, not only California wide, but statewide, nationwide. And so a buyer broker agreement will outline the expectations on who's responsible for a commission. And I'm going to roll the dice here and say that a year from now, I think the way that all of this flushes out, or however you want to say it, I think there's going to be 95% of sellers are going to offer out a buyer broker compensation. I'm going to go on the record and say it. Okay. That 5% of the time that a seller is not willing to offer out, or however it shakes out, but that percentage of the time that the seller is not willing to offer out a commission, guess who's on the hook for the commission? The buyer. Okay. So how does that look like? Well, that could look like you have your down payment to pay for, you have your closing costs to pay for, which down payment and closing costs, down payment, that's going to be anywhere from 0% if you're a VA, veteran, all the way to fill in the blank, 50% down. Okay. And then you have your closing costs. That's going to be 1 to 2 points, if not 2.5 points of the purchase price. Well, then on top of that, if you have a buyer agent commission, that could range between a flat fee of fill in the blank number, who knows, $2,000, all the way up to 3%, 3.5%. I've heard as high as 3.5%. So 3% of the purchase price of if you're buying a $600,000 property, that's $18,000. So you have your down payment, your closing costs, and that other huge chunk of money. I think that's going to prevent a lot of buyers from being able to afford a property because they weren't expecting that extra amount of money. So as a buyer's agent, the way that I'm foreseeing this happen is in that segment of the properties that are actually not offering a commission, my gut's telling me that a skilled real estate agent is still going to have the seller pay for their compensation in a roundabout way. I think for the purposes of this video, I would say go ahead and reach out to me and I can talk you through that. But in essence, the way that things have been here in the last 20 plus years since I've been selling real estate, I think it's going to happen going forward. I think there's some misinformation or a misunderstanding about what this might look like going forward. But ultimately, I think that all of the sales comps, and this is something that people need to keep in mind. If you go on to Zillow or you go on any of those property websites right now and you look at closed sales, there's a high probability that all of those closed sales have commissions already calculated into those numbers. So the sellers need to be made aware of that. Buyers need to be made aware of that. And at the end of the day, honestly, Cole, I think that this is going to be a non-issue in 12 months.
Sweet.
There's going to be documents that are going to have to be executed that we don't have today. But at the end of the day, I think it's going to be just fine. And we move on business as usual.
Yeah, and even if so, it's you know, not to downplay the amount of money, but it does just require some tweaking of the structure of the offer. If you're doing 10% down, maybe you're doing 5% down instead to make up for the difference. Like even the worst case scenarios, where worst case meaning buyer comes up with everything, there's still ways to intelligently structure things where it may feel like it's a significant amount, but in reality, we're not talking about a huge difference in payment terms, anyways. So, yeah, very interested to see how things shake out. I think it's going to depend highly upon how you as agents decide to handle it. If you guys collectively say, hey, this is how we're going to communicate with the public. I think what you just said will ring true. And I'm hopeful that that's the way that it goes. Because yeah, as much as people in the media have tried to make this about being best for the public, it really isn't. It really messes with buyers' ability to purchase houses, and particularly that first-time home buyer. It puts them potentially into a bad spot. So, yeah, I'm very interested to see how things shake out, and I'm hopeful that agents collectively will have the seller pay for buyer agent commission. So
I've got to
cool.
ask, and I know this is not going to exactly be good for our shelf life, but when it comes to VA, has VA came out with a stance on if they were going to it? Because isn't there's a certain amount of money that's a maximum of a credit that a buyer is willing to or able to collect? From my understanding, it was.
Um, So they haven't come out and made any announcements yet, but as it currently stands, like seller contributions, the buyer's agent commission is not calculated in that as it currently stands. So like whether the buyer's agent is getting 1% or 4% or whatever, that didn't count towards the maximum seller contribution towards the purchase of a house towards the buyer. So I don't think that, my guess would be they're not going to calculate that towards seller concessions. That's my what my gut tells me. But yeah, time will tell.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
All right.
cool. Well, we've been rolling for a bit. I think want to thank everybody for taking the time to watch the video. And as always, please, call, email, text, reply to this email. Chris and I are happy to be here as a resource to you. And don't feel like just because you reach out, it's like, oh, you got to buy a house or oh, you got to sell your house. We're here to be a resource to you to answer your questions. And when the time is right, we would love the opportunity and the privilege to help you buy or sell a house. But that's not what we're here for. We're here trying to help answer questions in the meantime. So thank you so much for your time. And Chris, thank you for all of that information. I'll probably have to watch this video when it comes out and watch it
Yeah.
myself a couple of times.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Take care.